Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So recently the stock market hit 25,000 and this was hailed by Trump supporters and hailed on the media as being some great accomplishment. The stock market is not the sole indicator of wealth and prosperity in the country itself. Only 80% of the stocks are owned by 10% of the population, meaning it's only a very small sliver of the electorate that even have stocks in the first place in order to benefit from this $25,000 or 25,000 point stock rise. Take a look at this. Share of United States families with zero or negative home wealth skyrockets. A greater share of Americans have more debt than money in the bank than at any point since 1962, according to Deutsche Bank economist Torsten Slork. And in a note to clients yesterday, Slork said that despite record stock wealth, home price levels just shy of housing bubble heights, Americans are poorer than at any point in nearly a quarter of a century. Record inequality. Top 1% controls 38.6% of America's wealth. This is money.com. This article goes through the way in which the middle class is essentially getting smaller and smaller and smaller, while the wealthy got richer and richer and richer. There's a stat that showed that I think it was like over 60% of Americans, if they had a bill for $500, let's say a car note, they wouldn't be able to pay it. Meaning if something happened to their car, the muffler fell out, the transmission was injured or damaged, they would not have the cash in order to pay it. Now, I've made this argument that you have been under economic warfare for the past 50 or 60 years. Your income stagnated while the income of the super rich spiked. 95% of the wealth went to the top 1% under Obama. That number is so staggering to me. It's mind-blowing to me. Donald Trump at his worst could only best them by 5%. Yes, Donald Trump is probably going to best them by that 5%. But I'm just saying, that's such a tiny margin. That is a massive amount of cash in order to essentially give to the top 1%. In the 1980s, your wages stagnated. The super rich got super richer, but your wages stagnated. Now, you compensated for this by taking out massive amounts of debt, either for college loans, either for your car, either for your medical bills. You're a hamster on a wheel. And the more debt that you've taken on yourself, you've put yourself in a situation where you're stuck. Now, I'm not talking about everybody in the society. There's some people who are more fluid, but I'm talking about the majority of the society. The majority of the society works low-wage jobs. Half of the society is in poverty, either through a poverty wage or it's in poverty outright. I'm making this point that the resources that have been harnessed in this country have fundamentally gone to the top. There's been a massive transfer of wealth from the 99%, or you can say the 90%, to the top. Politicians make sure that issues of class remain unspoken because their donors don't want them having the conversation about class. You can talk about identity all you want. Identity in no way threatens the economic system. What does threaten the economic system in the Ponzi scheme, or the way that this thing is set up, is conversations about class. Rules, policies, governance, those things, the way we organize ourselves is not an act of God. Those things are choice. One policy decision, one law after the next choice. Do you understand the things that are available to people in Europe in regards to the services that they allow for themselves? We have the richest country on the planet, and we've decided to allow certain people in our population to live like they were in third world conditions. Literally, the United Nations was in the United States looking at these figures of people living in third world conditions. If you allow plutocrats to essentially take over your political process, what do you think those plutocrats are going to do? Do you think they're going to be benevolent to you, in which case they're going to be the benevolent plutocrat? Or do you think they're going to do things to advantage themselves in policy and decisions? It's, of course, the latter. Why do we decide as a society to allow people to fall through the cracks? Why do we believe as a society that it's morally okay to put $50,000 of debt on the back of a 21-year-old just because they want to go to school? That person going to school, not only does it benefit that person who's going to school, who's a member of our society, who we should value and care about because he's a goddamn human being who's in our society. It will benefit that person. And in virtue of benefiting that person, it benefits the society that that person comes from. Even if that person makes the decision to take up philosophy, so what? That person is a member of our society, and we value that person as a member of our society. And we would allow that person to go to school because it helps all of us. This is one of those things of collective action that's beneficial to the whole. That person is going to be more likely to create a job. That person is going to be more likely to work a job. All of those things are true. All of those things give back to the society and the community that person is in. Putting that person underwater and $50,000 in debt or more that would hound him for the rest of his life in no way benefits your society. That person is getting married later. That person is stuck working in a job that that person may absolutely hate. The other part to this is healthcare. Why on earth do we as human beings, if we value each other as human beings, if we have the resources and the capabilities in our society, if we have the technical know-how in our society, why on earth would we allow somebody to be ill and not get medical treatment? Or at the very least, if that person had the temerity to get medical treatment, put a bill of thousands of dollars over top of his head. We're all vulnerable. The overwhelming majority of us are vulnerable. It would make absolute sense to me to lessen that vulnerability as a society and coming together and saying, we as a society have a floor. We would not allow people to go past that particular floor. If you're ill, you're going to get health care. If you want to learn, you're going to be able to get schooling. At the very least, we as a society have a framework in a way that is going to help you with some of the difficulties and the burdens of your life. That makes all the sense in the world to me. Now, that's not necessarily the way things are gone, though. 25,000. It hit 25,000. The richer have gotten magnificently rich. But in doing so, taxes have gone down tremendously. So the tax money that might have been flowing into government coffers is not. The government responds to that by saying, look, we can't afford to do these things. The best that we can do is a market-driven solution to healthcare. That's the best that we can do. Because we don't necessarily want to tax the people who actually have that cash. Meaning the 25,000 that stock market hit is indicative of somebody doing monstrously well. I can rattle off the stats of how bad everybody else is doing. Our society should be arranged in a way that helps the people of that society. If somebody wants to go to school, they should be able to go to school. We as a society should want that person to go to school, and we should support that person as they go to school. If a person is ill, we should want as a society for that person to be okay. And we should come up with systems of a society that allow people to get their education and get their health care without being monstrously saddled with debt. Why on earth would you want to chain yourself or arrange society in a way that allows you to be chained and enslaved through this kind of debt peonage? I mean, understand the situation to which you're presented with. You're in a capitalistic system. This particular game space, the way this space is arranged, capital is the point. If you have a huge amounts of cash, you're a virtuous person with something important to say, even if you don't have two brain cells that rub together. The game space does not care how you got that capital. The only thing the game space cares about is the capital is in your pocket. That gives you access to pretty much anything that you need within this particular system, including making you somewhat above the law in the way that you can behave. You're considered to be above others, even though the imaginary figment that you use for this is cash. For the people who don't have it, however, the same way that this has been used as a status symbol, this thing that allows you access to goods and services, where it's not enough that you have enough to make sure you have access to the things that you need to have also more. More in this case has become somewhat of a status issue. Contrary to more becoming a status issue, not having has become somewhat of a thing in which, I guess, to put a scarlet letter on the person. That person somehow is unmeritorious of the things that that person needs. That person hasn't earned the things that they need, which is an amazing thing to say. That person is somehow a degenerate or less than because that person doesn't have access to the things that they need. This is somewhat of an insane response, however. You as a human being have value, not because of the things that you do, but just purely because of who you are. The society, if it's going to believe that human beings have value and human beings have worth, and these are the things that these guys always talk about, their values and everything else, then there is no situation where we should allow somebody to go without. The stock market is at 25,000 and we have people sleeping on the streets. Does it sound like a sound society to you? Or does it sound somewhat problematic? We need, as a collective in our society, we need to admit that each of us, the majority of us, are vulnerable. Each of us, having a kid, or even yourselves, are vulnerable. The majority of us, anything for the most part, that would injure or that will put us in a situation where we're in straits. I'm saying this poorly. Freedom is not being a hamster on a wheel. In a capitalist society, freedom for the most part is your access to capital. It allows you to essentially pay for where you are, what you eat, what house you're in, the air that you breathe. Capital is your gateway to freedom. You can go anywhere with it. You can stay anywhere with it. You can bribe. And for the most part, like I said, you get a certain amount of status with the money that you have. The reverse is also true, however. Meaning when you don't have access to the things that you need, you can't call yourself free. Free to do what? Free to down the street? Hungry? Cold? Is that a freedom that you want? Is that a freedom that you want? There is no such thing as freedom without having your needs met. You can't be self-actualized if you're hungry and cold and starving. I mean, at the very least, your societal structure needs to supply a floor. If you're stuck in a job where I have these bills to pay, so I can't get myself out of this job. And even if you transfer to a different job, ultimately it's still in the same spot where you're stuck in that particular job. You have no expansive or no time at all to be left to your own devices because there is no edifice in your society that allows that. Meaning you start ending up with this question of what is the point of life? Honestly, I'm asking the question, what is the point of life? Now you can make a point that says, well, life doesn't really have a point. Fair enough if you're atheist or from a secular point of view. But if it doesn't really have a point, how do you want to spend it? And as human beings, we really want to spend it toiling away for somebody else to get magnificently rich off of our backs and off of our skill and off of our labor. I would argue that life is ultimately what people want is to some degree of freedom. Meaning not necessarily to be tied down to all of these devices and everything else that tries to extract wealth from you, extract influence or status, or put some kind of hierarchy on you based upon these unreal imaginary items or this game space that have convinced people that if they function in a particular way, working on a plantation is somehow freedom, and in working on that plantation, giving somebody huge amounts of wealth on the back of their labor is somehow a normal and natural way for a society to function. It is not. It is not. People have bought into the game space. And they bought into it in a way because they were normalized into it as kids. They grew up in it and everything else. So it feels natural as natural can be. They believe that the reason human beings function in the way that human beings function is just, this free will type of thing. Not necessarily paying attention to the fact that human beings are functioning within a game space. They have certain rules based on whether or not they're going to get the resources that they need to survive and persist themselves. The problem for this is the way to which we're organized. I would make the point that the point of life is not about working and putting money in somebody else's pocket. The point of life is experiencing to live. It is a sad state when your society is arranged in a way that makes that living, that experience difficult and almost impossible. For all the talk of freedom and equality and everything else, the truth of it is, as you can choose your plantation, but you're still on a plantation. You might not be a serf, you might not be a slave, but if you look at the relationship in those things, meaning you have somebody higher up over top of you, all of those situations are for the most part similar, and at the very least have a thread going through them. You can choose your plantation, but you're still on a plantation. And it still asks the question, is working 40 hours a week, spending all of your labor and time doing a job that you may absolutely hate, and at the very least working yourself into poverty, at least the majority of the people in this country. Is that what life is supposed to be? And not just what life is supposed to be, is the best that life can be. If there's no point, if we have the capacity to make sure our resources or make sure our needs are met, meaning we have the technical skill and acumen to make sure that each person on this planet has access to the things that they need for a basic existence. If that's true, which it is. And if we've gotten to the point, based on our technical know-how, that we can be beyond scarcity, which that is also true. If we could automate most of these processes, meaning if we focused on how do we automate the overwhelming majority of things in our lives in a way that would cut down on the amount of labor that's necessary to do those jobs and to make sure each person have the basics of the things that they need, the answer, of course, is also yes, we can do that too. Then all of this becomes a choice. The problem with this is not so much, look, human beings in this way are functioning somewhat as a program. The program needs to end and the program needs to be broken out. And the system, the way this thing is arranged, is creating poverty and inequities throughout the system itself. Talking about the stock market is not the same thing as talking about the individuals in the society. And for the individuals in the society, this is not something that we should allow. If that stock market is 25,000, there should be no homelessness, there should be no poverty, there should be nothing else like that associated with our country. And we know that that's not the point. Meaning the overwhelming spoils of that is going to the top. We should not allow that. Meaning the 99% should not allow that. So that is immensely problematic. I just want to make the point that the stock market is not indicative of the wealth of the nation or the economic health of the nation itself. This nation is suffering. These guys are looking at the stock market because ultimately the people who they care about are the people who've invested in that stock market, essentially the top 1% or even the top 10% if you're talking about Democrats. That's not for us. That's not for us. What I want, and I'll leave it at this, is for our society. I understand that I'm further to the left than most on this, but at the very least, this is a bare bones. What I would want is for elements that are in our political apparatus to say human beings have value and human beings are more valuable than anything else that we deal with in our politics. As such, we are not going to allow debt, peonage in our country for these items. We're not going to allow, or we're going to have structures in place that would make sure that no one is homeless, make sure that no one is impoverished to a degree where they can't get access to the basic things that they need. And even if the person wasn't working, even if the person refuses to do anything, at the very least, he would have a bare bone existence. We're not going to have people sleeping on the street. We're not going to have people not having access to food and water and shelter. This is our pact as a society. Now, I say that this is what I want because this is feasible and possible and is done in some Western countries. The housing I'm not certain about, but definitely the other parts. We can afford it. We can do it. You just need the political will to pull it off. And Democrats and Republicans are so bought and are so paid for that this is going to be hard to get any of that through. Meaning the housing, which I've never heard Democrats talk about, or healthcare, which you do hear some Democrats talk about, but I have a video with Chuck Schumer saying he's not on board for this, and I suspect Tom Perez is not on board for it either. And the education, which again, I haven't heard many Democrats being on board for that, meaning free education. I think Hillary Clinton mentioned in some of the election or they had a plan about it, but again, that's been swept under the rug the moment that the election was over with. We need to have a different country. That's my point. These things are feasible, and these things are not necessarily so far to the left. It's something that the American public would get behind and would agree to. You can do these things. You can't do these things with giving $1 trillion to the military and giving tax cuts to the wealthy, to the people who don't need it. No, you can't do both of those. But if you're talking about what's more important is making sure that the base of a country is intact. When you give money to plutocrats, which is essentially what the tax bill is going to do, they're going to put it in their pocket or they're going to put it in the stock market, meaning it is immensely foreseeable for the stock market to hit 25,000. You've given these guys massive amounts of cash, and these guys know they have a massive amount of cash coming, a return on their investment. So yeah, they're going to put money in the stock market. You know where they're not going to put that money? Into actually building real things. There may be some that do so, but ultimately it is their choice. And it is unlikely that this money is going to go into actually building something in an economy that is not roaring. I don't care what they say. This is not the roaring economy. If you would have given that money to the bottom, the people at the bottom are running from paycheck to paycheck. There are people in a hamster wheel. This is kind of my point. This is not freedom. We shouldn't live in this way. If you give them money, they're going to spend it. That money that's spent is going to go directly into the economy. It's almost a immediate infusion into the economy as those people buy the things that they need. In fact, when you give people money like that, they spend more than they have. Meaning, the amount, say if you give them 1,000, they may spend 1,200. They spend more than they have because they're already at the margins. They're already on a hamster wheel, trying to make ends meet. Putting that money in the bottom allows a direct infusion of that money into the economy itself. Putting that money into the hands of plutocrats, those plutocrats put that money in the bank or in stocks. I'll leave it at that. I just don't like this. We shouldn't be living this way. I passed 3 or 4 homeless people on the street yesterday going to the store. We shouldn't be living this way. We shouldn't be living this way. If they're going to brag about the stock market, I want to hear them brag about all the homelessness in the country being evaporated. I want them to brag about, you know, this thing of, hey, the life of our citizens. This country is one of the happiest countries in the world because these people, for the most part, have a larger freedoms. And I don't mean freedom to choose Pepsi or Coke. I mean freedom to be free of these entanglements of debt just from living your life or just from trying to live your life. There is no freedom being indebted. That's the point I kind of want to get across here. And the debt that these people have taken on just over the course of their life is purely through just natural means. They're not, I'm babbling. I'm just saying, the temerity to go to school and getting $15,000 debt is something like a punishment for going to school. Needing to go to the healthcare, needing to go to a doctor, you don't necessarily want to go because you don't want a medical bill. That is a fail. If you're going to be the richest country on the planet and you allow your citizens to live in poverty in this way or indebted in this way or running from pillar to post just to make ends meet on a hamster wheel, then your society has failed on some level. It's missed the point. We do need a revolution in this country. And part of that is people realizing that they're being taken advantage of and exploited. And that life does not have to be this way. And life could be very different. And the only thing they need to do is make a choice for something different. These structures aren't real. So I'll leave it at that. I hope that made sense. This ran longer though. Fuck, this ran much longer than I wanted. The first 15 minutes probably made my point, so I'm sorry. Alright guys, I will leave it at that. If you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. Thanks guys.